updating where they are and getting your input on them. But first, I want to give our chair and then vice chair the opportunity to offer any opening remarks as we start. So, Lieutenant Governor, I will hand the floor to you first.
Great. Well, thank you, Barrett. Good morning, everybody. For those of you who don't know, I am Lieutenant Governor Diane Primavera, and I'm going to keep my remarks brief so we can spend time hearing about the initial conversations the subcommittees have had. My staff and I have been able to join all of the subcommittee meetings that have been held this far, and I've been able to attend at least one meeting of each of the subcommittees. The caliber, the diversity, and the knowledge of the subcommittee members is so impressive. I was impressed at how well they worked together from the start and want to thank them for their dedication to improving the rights and access of Coloradoans with disabilities. I also want to give a special thanks to Representative Ortiz for sponsoring a bill that will establish the Colorado Disability Opportunity Office. This is brand new, and this office will be, that's if the law passes, put it that way. This office will be a hub for disability policy and be a mechanism to implement the ideas that are included in the final report from this task force in 2025 and hopefully coordinate a lot of disability work in the state. So thank you all for joining us today. I know this is a busy time of year for all of us, so I want to thank you all for being here. Wish you happy holidays, and I'll turn it back to Barrick.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. And with that, I'll offer the floor to Representative Ortiz.
Thank you. I want to thank Lieutenant Governor and the Gov's office and their team in general, especially Josh Winkler, for bringing that bill forward. I think it's a great idea. That's why I wanted to jump on it. It's going to be a way to make sure that we're able to continue this work without tying it to any one specific legislator or administration. So I'm really excited about that. I also want to thank everybody that had a hand in making the legislative preview disability rights conference that we had at the Capitol on the 13th a success. Second annual, we're going to keep it going, so I appreciate that. And just to remind everyone about how important this work is, we did have a member that spoke about basic access on the outdoors. He's a part of the B77 committee. And for those that aren't aware for basic access in the outdoors, what that is they're responsible for setting standards around accessibility for ski lifts, and was very disturbed to hear that there were individuals that are members of that committee and that attended that committee stating that we're only 3% of the population, so we really don't need to make every ski lift accessible, that we have access to different terrain in different spots of the mountain. So, you know, that's okay if not every ski lift is accessible. So just to remind everybody of why this work is important, and I really appreciate the hard work and the time. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Ortiz. And as I said at the top, first, I apologize. Before I go into the agenda, just a couple of operating norms to remind everybody. We do ask that folks refrain from using the chat. It can be distracting for all members. It is particularly distracting for anybody using a screen reader trying to keep up. So we ask that all the conversations stay on screen wherever possible. If you're a member of the executive committee and you're in a place where it's comfortable and safe to do so, we'd love to have you on camera. Those members of the public, if any, joining, we do ask that you leave your cameras off. And one final request is when you speak, if you would first identify yourself so everybody knows who it is that's speaking. With that, I'm going to go right into our agenda, and it really is twofold. One, we want to give everybody an update on the work of the subcommittees, but that will be fairly brief. What we then want to do is hear from all of you, your input about these, based on the information we share, and based on the roles and your interests and experience and expertise. We want to solicit your input on additional areas of inquiry for each of these subcommittees. If there are specific outcomes, deliverables, ideas that you want considered by these. And we would love for each member of this executive council of the task force to become kind of an executive sponsor or an ex officio member helping support us in identifying additional experts, in keeping track of the content, identifying where we may want to bring in extra research. So as we have these conversations, I would ask you to think about which one of these subcommittees, the rewrite, the government subcommittee, the housing subcommittee, and the outdoor recreation, might you want to offer a really lean in on. But with that, I will start with our subcommittee readouts. The first one will be the rewrite subcommittee. And I believe everybody knows that committee was scheduled to have 2 meetings. By the second meeting, we were on track with some conversations around definitions that the group wanted to explore. We ended up scheduling a 3rd meeting a week ago. During our second meeting, the general consensus was there were some definitions that the group wanted to look at. They had identified topics that they want to explore in the coming year, but the group generally didn't think that they were going to be ready to offer specific recommendations on any of those in the December report that we're required to submit. That did change on our December 11th call. That group came around, and on a couple of definitions, they came to unanimous agreement that they would like to include in the report recommendations for a couple of definitions that I will walk through, and then we'll circulate all of those. To accomplish that, those are now being drafted. We will then circulate them for the group to look at informally, and we are working with the members to gather that group for a short meeting that will be publicly noticed so that they can vote on those recommendations. But let me walk through what those are. The definitions that that group has unanimously agreed they would like to make recommendations to be included in Colorado revised statutes are to bring the definitions of disability and individual with a disability into Colorado law. Currently, the Colorado revised statutes reference the federal definitions, and for a number of reasons, the group all feels that those definitions should be incorporated into state law. They are not looking at making any substantive changes to what is currently the referenced ADA statutes, other than things like numbering within our statutes, but they do want to bring those in. Before I go into the other definitions they're going to explore or the other topics they've identified, I first want to pause and give the floor to Representative Ortiz for any thoughts on that, and then to the general group with any questions or comments. But again, the two definitions this group intends to recommend to all of you be incorporated into Colorado statute are the current ADA definitions for disability and individual with a disability. Representative Ortiz, do you want to respond to that at all?
This is Representative Ortiz. No, if this was unanimous and this is what they want to do, then I'm supportive of that.
Appreciate that. Do any members have questions about that piece of what I'm sharing? Okay, I'm going to continue then. And what you will see in the report you all receive over the next 10 days will be a series of recommendations, or those few recommendations, and then a series of topics that the group has identified that they intend to explore over the next 12 months. I want to emphasize that the report will underscore that this is their current list and is not intended to be limiting. The first issue is around definitions. As I said, there's these two specific definitions that they're ready to recommend be adopted into Colorado law. They also intend to explore whether there's a need for what we have referred to in that subcommittee as some of the downstream recommendations. Under the ADA there are, and CADA, there are additional requirements around things like accommodations and communications. And the group has said that they want to be thoughtful and spend time exploring all of those definitions to make sure that everything is appropriately reflected in Colorado statute and that they're comfortable that it is strong enough. So they don't have any specific recommendations other than the report will clearly say that there are a number of definitions they're going to spend time during the first quarter of 2024 exploring. Additionally, they have a number of topics that they intend to explore, and these will be included in the report that you receive and then that will be distributed. The topics that they have identified to explore include the issue of emotional distress and damages, the caps on relief and modernizing dollars from when they were written in the early 1990s. They're going to explore the timelines for filing different types of claims, the standards for exhaustion, the accountability measures. They want to take a look at the public accommodation laws, including the potential incorporation of the 2010 DOJ standards for accessible design into Colorado state law, which is something that Texas has done in some form. They want to explore the burdens of enforcement and the Representative Ortiz.
I didn't mean to interrupt, this is Rep. Ortiz. I am very confused about the topic around exhaustion because last year we passed a specific bill to get rid of administrative exhaustion, and I'm going to be very loath to bring anything forward recommendation-wise that's going to re-put in place exhaustion. So just want to make that very clear because that's what was part of allowing certain businesses to block securing basic access. And I go back to the example that I've cited before that I'm going to cite again. about an individual that had a service dog that needed their service dog and that was charged a pet fee unjustly for it. And then because of exhaustion through the CCRD, which they have a mediation process, the hotel owner there was no teeth, there was no requirement for them to come to the table and meet, and therefore they didn't, and therefore there was no resolution. So I'm going to be very loath, and I'm actually extremely disappointed that they're talking about administrative exhaustion again.
Noted, and to be very clear, there's been no advocacy that it go one way or another. Somebody simply said we want to talk about it, but I will be sure to carry your thoughts and that prior action forward to the group. Jennifer, did you have a question?
Yes, I'm not sure, but it's possible that the exhaustion issue is around the employment context. So I believe there is still exhaustion of administrative remedies required to bring forth a disability claim against your employer. So I'm not privy to the discussions, but that's what came to my mind when you talked about exhaustion.
Thank you. And to you and the whole group, Rep. Ortiz, I will get clarity from the group on exactly what they are referencing in that. It was a very brief mention. So we'll bring back to this group what specifically they want to explore. Continuing, those were issues identified during our first couple of meetings. At our most recent meeting, they added several others they'd like to explore in 2024. One, the off-duty usage of cannabis by individuals with a disability. They want to explore and discuss the timelines and costs to come into compliance with ADA, with a note of concern about putting today dollar values into statutes that may quickly become outdated. They want to explore the process and rights for determining reasonable accommodation, particularly the interactive process between an employer and an employee. And finally, throughout everything, they want to put an emphasis on examining other state best practices and using wherever possible plain and easy to understand language. So I'm going to pause there on the readout of that and ask for anybody's reactions, questions, or input on additional topics that you would like to suggest this group consider.
Barrick, this is Elizabeth Moran. I lost my internet connection very briefly. So can you tell me which committee you're reporting out on? Because I didn't hear that. You said this committee, but I don't know which committee.
I apologize. Yes, this is the rewrite subcommittee.
Great. Thank you so much.
Okay, we will come back then to the rewrite subcommittee as we dig in more deeply to how we want to lay the work out for each subcommittee going forward. I'm going to now go through each of the other subcommittees. I'm sorry, I'm getting a Michaels, Stone, did you have a question? I'm sorry.
Thank you. It was more just of a comment in support of this is Michael Stone, task force member. I really love that this committee is asking these questions and wants to dig further. I just wanted to share my support. I think it's wonderful that they're actually asking questions and being curious and taking it to this level.
Thank you very much. And I apologize, I had initially missed seeing you indicate you wanted to speak. I'll try to be better. I'm looking at notes on one screen and the screen on the other. The other three subcommittees have only had their first meeting. And for those of you who haven't joined, so you know, the arc of conversations across all of them is pretty similar. We use the first meeting for everybody to get to know one another. We think, given the complexity of the issues, it's important that people understand a few things. Number one, what each person's point of entry is into the conversation. And by that, I mean quite simply, what is their personal and professional experience and background, and why did they choose to be involved with this subcommittee? So we start by sharing that. We then hear from members about a number of different topics, depending on what they're most interested in. But the threads that weave throughout all of them are number one, what do they think the current state of dynamics is within the topic we're addressing? We start by reading through what is the legislative charge of each of these subcommittees. We ask them what they think are some of the big misperceptions within the community, whether that's misperceptions about the law, about different stakeholders' perceptions, or about the lived experience. We ask them when we have time what they think are the biggest challenges, as well as some of the low-hanging fruit that we might be able to tackle. But really, the purpose of these first conversations is to ground everybody in what is the work ahead and what is their perspective of the issues that we need to address. So I'll talk first about what the government subcommittee shared, and these are very high-level themes just meant to spark the conversation here in this group. One of the biggest things in the government subcommittee was the importance of education for all stakeholders. People thought that many stakeholders, public, private sector, and citizens, just don't understand all of the rights and obligations that currently exist and how the limits on some of those play out for different people. One person mentioned, for example, that they were up at Ski Spectacular in Breckenridge, and at an event intended to be supportive and embracing of adaptive athletes. The hotel itself was not particularly accessible. There was an elevator that dead-ended at a set of stairs, and one of the subcommittee members raised this concern to some hotel employees who joked about it and essentially said, well, bummer for you, that's too bad. And just kind of that callousness and the lack of awareness was something that ran throughout our conversation with that government subcommittee, of the lack of awareness that what some view as a minor inconvenience is much more significant to the person experiencing that. The group also raised questions around the hiring process. And several different members said, I know in my application, I am asked whether I have a disability, and I'm wondering what's on the other side of that desk when they see that. Are they jumping to, oh, I don't want to deal with an accommodation? So just some real desire to look at what hiring processes are, see where there can be transparency, and what that looks like for different stakeholders. Several folks raised the issue about the phrase reasonable accommodation, and the fact that an employer or an employee or an individual with a disability versus the person charged with the accommodation may perceive those very differently. And this group particularly flagged that next year, they want to really dig in on both what the legal definition is of reasonable accommodation, how that is, how people are trained to interpret it, and what that looks like for different individuals. A number of people, and when I say a number, more than half of the group referenced the ADA and some misperceptions that people have of, well, we passed the ADA, so that issue is resolved. You're taken care of. And a lot of people felt that many people in the public, as well as many people in the public and private sectors, viewed the ADA as what needed to be done and not really understanding that the ADA simply gives folks the right to sue if they can find a lawyer who has the capacity to take it on. They felt there's a lot of educating that needs to be done about what the ADA is and is not for the general public and for those who are subject to it. Some people brought up some other issues like charging stations for electric vehicles, and whether those spots are being designed to be accessible. There was the concept brought up of, are we designing with the thought of accessibility from the onset of a new project, whether that's the building or expansion of a building or an outdoor space, or are we starting to address accessibility only after the primary design has been done and it's an add-on, which either adds additional cost or gives people reason to say, well, we're already done and we don't have the ability to do that. So this group wants to explore, as part of that government access, whether this is being a fundamental concern in the design of physical facilities and government systems more broadly. Finally, one of the issues, Representative Ortiz, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I'm very impressed by that statement, because that is precisely the perspective that I am seeking all of these subcommittees to start from. I had a conversation with a very and this is not something that's limited just to able-bodied individuals. I had a conversation with an individual from community. She has a platform. She has an organization. that does help a lot of people with disabilities. But even the ableism in my conversation talking to her about trying to incentivize people following a 33-year-old law was really disgusting for me. It was really tough for me to hear. And so to hear that they are proactively looking at making sure that this happens from the get-go, from the design of the building, right? And the analogy that I tried to make to her and others, it would be like if you designed a building and then after you're done designing, being like, all right, what about the fire code though? Oh, I guess we have to go back and do that. Like that is designing for basic access should be as second nature as designing with the fire code in mind, with basic safety for everyone that goes through that building in mind. So I really appreciate the individuals of that subcommittee for starting with that understanding and that perspective. That is exactly what I'm looking for.
I appreciate hearing that, and I'm sure they will when I share it back with them. Just one more, and then I'm going to pause. The other issue that was brought up regarding emergency management systems and emergency management plans, and questions about whether all jurisdictions across the state are adequately addressing issues for Coloradans with disabilities as part of accessing both the EMS system and their city, county, or other local jurisdictional emergency management plans for different types of disasters. We will be coming back to each of these subcommittees to dig into future work, but I want to pause there and give all of the members of the task force opportunity to ask questions or just reflect on what you heard from this government subcommittee. Michael Stone, please.
First, I want to echo. This is Michael Stone speaking. Rep Ortiz comments with respect to the ADA. And it is an antiquated law that was a great floor. It was a great start. However, I just want to in support of that, whoever made the comment with respect to Ski Spectacular, I was there, and I have been a regular attendant there. I'm a blind athlete, and there's so much irony around the lack of accessibility at that hotel. At resort, it's the Beaver Run Resort specifically, and that is just a small indication of how big this subcommittee's work really is, and do that. I would also encourage, and this is a problem with respect to education. I'm going to go back to that, and this is that in our state, let's face it, each accessible parking spaces are still called handicapped. And I think in there, there's a lot of problems with respect to that. I would encourage this group to heavily look into and see what we can do about improving that, because that is generally it's one of our first, I guess, for able-bodied, that's one of their biggest aspects of confusion. And let's face it, it's not the Americans with Handicaps Act either. So there's all kinds of aspects about it, but I would highly encourage that to be part of their discussions.
Thank you, Michael. Elizabeth, I see your hand up.
Thank you. So Elizabeth Moran here, and I too am heartened by the discussions thus far with that government committee. I would like to make sure that they're putting on their radar, particularly if they're looking at the ADA. And while we're talking about accessible spaces and we're talking about things like universal design, that they are also being mindful of universal design and creating intuitive spaces and accommodations and supports for folks who do not have a body disability. It is a mind or a brain. So folks who have cognitive disabilities, they need intuitive spaces. They need services and supports in place that provide effective communication and accessible spaces for all services, programs, and activities that involve state and government. So really looking at, I would encourage them, I feel like, of course, my focal point at the ARC of Colorado is on intellectual and developmental disabilities, but also related disabilities, traumatic brain injury, mental health, disabilities that are associated with aging, Alzheimer's, dementia, those sorts of disabilities. And I just want to make sure that committee is also being mindful of those individuals So looking at both physical barriers, but also looking at universal design and accessibility and supports from all angles, but certainly to include individuals with cognitive disabilities, particularly as our population ages. If we're also lucky to live long enough to experience those sorts of disabilities, I sure hope that our government activities, services, and programs are accessible.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Representative Ortiz.
And piggybacking off of that, I just want to make sure, because I didn't hear it in the report, that there are discussions around candidates and elected leaders, staff of state agencies, and also individuals that want to come to these places where their business is being done and advocate. So I just want to make sure that they understand, because we did discuss this, that this should be a part of the onboarding process, what that subcommittee was based on, the original language of that bill. And I didn't hear any input about candidates getting elected. I didn't hear any input about people serving. So like that part seems to be missing from this report. I don't know if they just didn't have enough time to discuss it or what the intent is there, but that is a very critical piece to make sure not only are we talking about visible and invisible disabilities, but that we're talking about the life cycle of government, not just access into the buildings, but how do we make sure we get the representation that we need, including people with disabilities? How do we make sure that school boards are making their meetings accessible to include plain language text when we're talking about people with cognitive disabilities? Like part of the bill was mandatory virtual participation, or if you lived in an area that was a broadband dead zone, then phone participation with services for your specific type of disability. So I want to make sure that it's said that they consider that and include that with the discussions that they're having.
Understood. And let me clarify, I was providing a pretty high level overview. I want to assure you that, one, we included that in our introduction and overview. The group actually had some specific conversation around the example that you had shared with us about things like petitioning onto ballots and barriers even to the act of running. We also discussed the accessibility to serving, whether an elected, appointed, or hired office. And I don't recall offhand, I believe it was a member of a city council who brought up that her own building is not accessible. So Representative Ortiz, we will absolutely include that. And when we get to building out the scope in a few minutes, I'm going to want to pick your brain even further on that. But that was just an error or an oversight, a lapse in the brief overview I did. That is very much being included in the conversation. Lieutenant Governor, I see your hand up, ma'am.
Thank you, Barry. And I appreciate Rep. Ortiz's comments, especially about elections and serving, because, you know, once upon a time when I was running, walking, and I really mean walking door to door, going upstairs and flights of stairs into apartment buildings and things like that, I often thought that running for office was just for people who had the ability to walk, you know. And I just thought that was really limiting for being able to get the voice of people with disabilities, you know, at the table. And one comment that really kind of, I don't know, it was an aha moment for me was someone made the comment, I think it was a member from Grand Junction, that it was a historic building, so it really didn't need to be accessible. And I thought, you know, I bet 150 years ago or whatever, after wars and things like that, I'm sure there were people that used wheelchairs and had mobility issues. And it just shows you historically how people with disabilities have been left out of the conversation, out of the planning, out of any kind of consideration, because they didn't even consider then that people who used a wheelchair couldn't get into the building even at that time. And so what we're saying by saying that historical buildings don't have to become accessible is that we don't care that the Joshes and the Rep. Ortizes of the world can't ever get into a beautiful historic building and see it. I mean, that's really what we're saying. So that was really an aha moment for me, and I just wanted to share that comment.
I note some signs of appreciation for that from Representative Ortiz, for those not on camera or connected there. We will come back to talk more about the scope of each of these and to get additional input, both on the things you want to make sure we're clear on from you and the things you might suggest the groups consider. I'm going to now go through the readout on the high level themes for the housing subcommittee. And they had more, but I will also preview this by saying this is not exhaustive or all inclusive. They did have more. At the start of the housing subcommittee, the number one thing we heard from people was we need data. We know there is a housing crisis in Colorado. We want to understand what the data really is when it comes to accessible and attainable housing, and not just statewide raw numbers. They want to understand the inventory and the demand. They want to understand the geography of where it's available and what the price points are. Somebody brought up the specific issue about senior housing and assisted living. And they said that they were looking to move an individual into an accessible room, and were told that it was going to be 6 or more months before that individual could move into an accessible room, which led to another conversation about who does carry the burden of making the adaptations to ensure it is accessible. Is that clear? Have we educated people? And what happens when there are repairs to the same? Whether that's a ramp or other issues that enhance accessibility, who's responsible for repairs when needed? Some folks shared the misperception a lot of folks have that Prop 123 just a couple of years ago delivered sufficient funding, when in fact it addresses 22,000 units, which as we calculated was about a $39,000 subsidy. But similar to the ADA, just much more recent, some sense out there that Prop 123 solved it, so we didn't really need to be talking about it anymore. Folks identified that land is such a significant cost to all housing, and that creates even greater disparities and inequities geographically when we're looking at where folks can afford to access these homes. One of our developers made the point that it's important to remember that it can take up to 2 years from them deciding to initiate a project until they actually break ground. And we're looking at then anywhere between 8 to 18 months for smaller size construction. People wanted to make sure that we incorporate the perspectives and the important role of housing authorities in addition to the state's own. They brought up, as you've heard on a number of the subcommittees and a number of our own conversations, the challenges navigating the system, from knowing what agencies or groups are there to help to navigating the paperwork, and particularly for those with what they describe as less visible disabilities, being able to navigate all of their rights. We talked a bit about what is it that's fundamentally broken that we need to fix. People said certainly the housing market itself, but particularly the inventory for accessible housing. When we talk accessible, they are noting both it being physically accessible and those physically accessible units being financially attainable and accessible. People talked about the dichotomy of where there are better services for individuals with different disabilities tends to be more in our urban areas, where the very cost of living becomes prohibitive and the number of units is even more troubling. People, as they have on some of our other groups, mentioned the public mindset, and that to the public, whether that's a developer, a landlord, a building code enforcer, they see these as minor issues, but it certainly is not minor to those facing them. The group noted that it's not just the policies, and they do intend to make recommendations on policies, but it's also the practice of everybody involved, from developers to state governments to those who approve permits and other issues. It's a matter of a culture, an attitude, and an awareness. The group talked about the need for incentives, and in talking about incentives, they want to make sure that we're addressing both ownership and renting. And we talked a bit, particularly in today's economy, when we've seen that inversion of what's affordable to own versus what's affordable to rent, a real desire to see more paths to home ownership, to build stability and to break cycles of intergenerational poverty, and to start building that generational wealth by making it more accessible, particularly to Coloradans with disabilities, to access home ownership. Members brought up the construction defects and the effect that has on condos and other types of development, and noted that even with something like a $50,000 down payment assistance from some programs, when we're facing an average home cost of $650,000, that's really just starting to scratch the surface. People wanted to see if we could explore ideas for incentives for developers to ensure they're building accessible and affordable homes. When we talked about all of these issues, people really identified the need to learn, that they want to spend the first few months of 2024 really getting detailed and granular about the demand, the inventory, the history, the trends. They want to get specific about what goes into building accessible homes, single family, multi-unit, single story, and multi-story, and the different costs or considerations in all of those. They also said they want to get more developers' perspectives to see if we can't find more collaborative solutions on this. So those, again, high-level themes, certainly not limiting to what they will explore, but I want to pause there for initial reflections and reactions with my assurance that in 10 minutes, we'll come back to discussing where we want to see that group. And first, I'll go to Representative Ortiz.
Thanks for that. So just jotted down some thoughts as you went through their 30,000 foot, understanding that it's not exhaustive, and that I wasn't there for that meeting. But the first thing that came to my mind is who collects the data and how, right? Like they say they want data, and I also want to start by saying that the idea of time, space, and cost is always cited as an obstacle. And I hope this subcommittee understands that if they're going to cite that as an obstacle, that they understand that they are charged with bringing solutions, that they don't just cite these obstacles without bringing forward solutions. Because that has been done, that is ableist, that is not what the purpose of this task force is. It is their job, it is theirs to figure out how to make sure this works and to bring solutions, not just their questions and problems. Because that, to me, that calls into question the good faith aspect of whether people are a part of this task force to get in the way or to solve problems. And again, I'm not impugning motives, or I'm generically bringing that up. So, and going back to who collects data and how, what matters when the reason why this is very timely is because there's a movement or a push to dilute our communities counting when it comes to the census. Okay, so let's just start with that. The fact that they are trying to make it so those with what they deem as minor disabilities, right? And this goes back to reasonable accommodations. Well, by whose estimation is something a minor disability, and by what right do they then should not be counted as having a disability by the census? We are 20 to 25% of the population. We don't have the same disability. Different disabilities need different accommodations. They have different severities. I understand that. But already there's a movement federally by some to try and dilute our population so that we're undercounted, so that it seems like the services are not needed or are cost prohibitive, whatever excuse they want to drum up. So as soon as I hear we want to collect data, I hope people understand why that puts me on the defensive, is because we're already seeing different ways in which different groups are trying to dilute our power and undercount us. So I want to caution them and bring that to the forefront there. The question about who is responsible for repairs, I want, and this, I don't know how much of this happened during the first meeting, but who's responsible for repairs when it comes to fire codes? That's your answer. That is your answer. Basic access needs to be thought of as basic safety. And so whatever the answer is for that is the answer that I'm going to be hoping that subcommittees come to on their own. And I will leave it there. Those are just some initial thoughts that I jotted down.
I appreciate it. And one clear copy on your instructions, and we will make sure on that. On the data, I just want to note they were not asking to collect data. A lot of the individuals on that subcommittee were saying we don't know the facts, and they want more information on the inventory. But I will certainly collaborate and coordinate with you. Yes, sir.
And so again, this goes to why it's important to understand the context of the first bill, because I can imagine who those statements came from. And that was what was cited for not passing this bill in the first place was, well, we think you're exaggerating the data, because the original mandate, given that we're 20 to 25% of the population, and that's not including our aging that could benefit from universal design. That is not including our aging that are scrambling in an overstretched living facility system, right? That is not, so 20 to 25%, we were looking at 15% of accessible units, and then we pushed it down to 10. And even at 10, some of the stakeholders were balking at that, saying that that is still too much, that the current system we have is enough for accessible housing, which is absolute garbage. So I'm going to put pressure on you and Carrie to make sure that these discussions are steered in a way that creates solution and that does not allow the same people that were trying to block the movement towards true equity and basic access in housing, to allow them to use the same tired excuses to block true equity and basic access.
Understood. And one, I look forward to you continuing to push and help us shape that, and to being able to reach out to you as a thought partner to bring more facts into that conversation. So absolutely. Before I do a readout on outdoors, and then we go into a conversation about the future conversations for each of these, any other reflections on the housing subcommittee or questions?
Well, I just have one question, and I think I really appreciate Representative Ortiz, the dialogue and the discussion. It's definitely insightful on my end because I'm usually the one who's working through trying to deal with some of these requirements. So I appreciate you saying that we need to come with solutions. And I think I just want to reiterate that part because, you know, there is really a question of how these things are paid for. Like that is the reality of it. Like as much as, and I'm learning numbers I hadn't heard before. So I would really like more information and more education to understand 20 to 25% of the population is what it is that we're working here to try and address. So that's something I definitely need to learn more about. But I think that, you know, it does beg the question. I totally agree that these are solutions that we need to solve for, but, you know, we do have realities of how it is this stuff's going to get paid for. And so there are not necessarily a lot of funding options, which I think is part of this task force job as well, is to identify where the gaps are, where there are not funding options for, and also promote and try and find opportunities to go and create those funding solutions, right? Because they do need to match up somewhere, right? So I think we need to be thoughtful about the solutions that we're bringing because they do need to be things that are actually able to be implemented. Thank you.
And not to call you up, but I just want to remind folks to introduce themselves. For those not on screen, that was Kirsten speaking. I want to, Rep Ortiz, I see you leaning in with a hand up. Please jump in.
Absolutely. So yes, no one's saying don't, like, again, the point is to come up with a solution. And there's no idea that's going to be considered a bad idea. Like that's not what I'm saying here, right? But like buildings now in 2023 cost more to make than they did in 1910. Why? Because we lived through the Great Chicago Fire, because we lived through disasters that were harmful to able-bodied people. And because of those disasters, because of that loss of life, created coding that provided basic safety. And cost was cited then, but it should not be and was not a barrier to making sure that we save lives and make things safe, right? That's the way that this needs to be thought of. This is something that is equated to safety, right? And no solution should be off the table. We can talk about incentive packages or different funding packages, but the bottom line is that basic access is as critical and as much of a right as fire code.
Yeah.
So the responsibility needs to be borne and it needs to be moved forward. We don't talk about let's take another equity issue. When we talk about equal pay for women, there were plenty of businesses that were citing the cost and that were being sexist and were citing the fact that, oh, well, they get pregnant, they are out with their kids, they do this and that, this is why they deserve to be paid less. So when I just hear cost being brought up, to me, that is along the same vein. And yes, I know that we live in a reality where time and cost are resources that we have to manage. That's not what I'm saying here. But individuals, the general you, can't just cite cost and then sit back and say, well, this is the reality that we have to work within. I expect the subcommittees to work through that and offer a myriad of solutions to manage those issues. That's the expectation.
And I'm going to lean in a little bit here, and I have the clear sense we'll be having a lot of these conversations on this exec council, because just to remind all of you, the subcommittees are not making recommendations to the governor or the legislature. They're making recommendations to all of you. And our approach as facilitators is to have the conversation first about what the solution should be. And in that, we operate in what I often refer to as the land of no barriers, unicorns, and rainbows. We asked them to bring what the solutions should be, independent of what somebody thinks the burden, whether financial, time, or otherwise. And then we will also have a conversation once we've identified solutions of what the considerations and implications of those are. And that will all come to you as that package. Mr.
Sounds
Stone, please.
Thank you. Michael Stone here. While I am blind and a member of this task force, I also am a 30-year developer. And one thing, and interestingly enough, I came out of business school right when ADA was implemented. I have a real interesting perspective on it because of what I was doing at that time. And so I'd like to encourage that subcommittee to focus that the developer mentality is always based on doing the minimums. And to understand that. And so in the spirit of education, as they educate themselves, understand that is always going to be the developer mentality, is how do I not just get around this, but how do I just maintain or those minimum requirements, whatever they be. So my encouragement to that subcommittee when they are coming up with solutions is to how do we improve those minimums and set the bar a little bit higher. That's all I got on that one.
Appreciate that, Mr. Stone. And I will forewarn you, I said at the top of the call, we were going to ask members of this council to be willing to lean in on some subcommittees. You may have just foreshadowed where we're going to hope that you will lean in, but I'll leave that to you. I'm going to move on to the outdoors subcommittee. And then what we'll do is come back to a full circle discussion of each of these with two questions. One will be additional topics or specific issues you'd like them to explore. Two will be where you would like to lean in. I will also offer that will be the start of that. We will also reach out to all of you with the offer to either complete an online survey or to talk with us one-on-one about where you'd like to lean in and where you'd like to see these groups go. Outdoor recreation, I will tell you, is going to be the shortest readout only because the issues were so similar across all of the members. And it came down to fundamental accessibility in a state that boasts of our outdoor recreation, just how inaccessible so much of it seems to individuals with all forms of disabilities. The group felt that Colorado should be setting the national standard for outdoor recreation for both adaptive athletes and for all Coloradans with a visible, an invisible, or a cognitive disability, anything that inhibits them. They want to work to change the perceptions and the stigmas around athletes with disabilities. They mentioned that it's not enough just to get to the door or get to the parking lot or the trailhead. It's what happens once you are there. Once you get to a trailhead, can you get through the blockades onto the trail? Are there the types of items available throughout the trails? Whether that's somebody with a chronic digestive issue that requires facilities, somebody being able to get their adaptive bicycle through gates and blockades, or as Rep Ortiz has mentioned and others brought up, dropping off equipment, whether that's at a riverhead, a trailhead, or at one of our ski resorts. Folks brought up that transportation is a major issue. Getting transportation to some of the amazing spaces, whether that's in the mountains, on the plains, or just along the Front Range or the Western Slope, that excessive transportation for Coloradans with disabilities is a real challenge. People also brought up the potential for the huge economic win for the state of Colorado if we can get a lot better at this. That this is a multi-million, multi-billion-dollar global market, and the opportunity for Colorado to attract both manufacturers and suppliers, but as well as all of the adaptive athletes from around the world should also be a part of our conversation. We talked briefly about some of the misperceptions. And Rep Ortiz, I think this fits with what you were just saying. A number of the group's members on this group said that there's a perception that it's just a small group. Well, it's only a few people who can't access that trail. It's only a few people who were bothered that at that hotel, the elevator went to stairs. And they really want to clarify and correct public misperception. And on that same thing, and this is something I've heard from several of you, including Rep. Ortiz, that it's too expensive, and that the cost is a valid excuse for people to not make these opportunities accessible. And with that, several members said, let's name who is the largest owner of these lands and facilities, and it is government. The group brought up both accessibility for those with what they describe as obvious versus those with less visible or invisible disabilities. And finally, a public perception that they felt has spilled over into those responsible for ensuring access, whether that is those deciding spending or those overseeing it, a belief that those with a disability can't have a full experience and that it should be a watered down version, so we don't really need to make it entirely accessible. Other than that, the conversation was all of these members really talking about all of the different forms of recreation, from walking and gentle hikes to cycling, hiking, adaptive snow sports, water sports, mountain climbing. They were naming all of the things that all of Colorado should be able to access. And they want to make sure that we really lean on both government and private sector to ensure that access. I will pause there for thoughts, reactions, and questions before we go into workshopping each of these committees a little bit. Rep. Ortiz, please.
Yeah, this Rep. Ortiz, I'd love to hear that they want to set the standard. Like that was music to my ears. That should be what every subcommittee is looking to do, is setting the standard when it comes to basic access for the rest of the nation. Because again, when you think of the life cycle of civil rights, whether we're talking about women's suffrage or the civil rights movement in the 1950s, we didn't get ours until 1990. And that was not full equity, that was a floor. So I feel like this subcommittee has that standard right, that they want to set the tone, that they want to be the example. I also really appreciate how they're looking at this from a business point of view. I remember bringing forward a resolution that was trying to quantify the contributions that Accessible Sports has here in Colorado. And it was a very cursory, calling the different adaptive sports programs, what is your budget, adding that together, trying to call the different businesses like Enabling Technology, Adaptive Reactions that does mountain bikes, what is your gross throughout the year, and trying to add that all together. And it was around $30 million. And that was basic. It wasn't including the tickets that adaptive athletes are buying to come here. It isn't including the hotel rooms, not including the rental cars, So this push to really quantify the impact that Colorado has, not on just getting anyone to the outdoors, but adaptive sports in general. That is the reason I came here. One of the main reasons I came here was when I was a newly injured service member, all the flyers, all the events that I was getting invited to were out here in Colorado. So my thought was just to cut the middleman and have the Army move me here and medically retire me here. Not everybody has made that decision. They have families for whatever reasons, and they're spread out throughout the country. But the bottom line is this is the destination. We are the Mecca when it comes to adaptive sports, and we need to tout that, and we need to keep reminding everyone of that as one of the main reasons why we should continue to push and secure basic access, because not only does it benefit people with disabilities, but it benefits the economy of Colorado.
Thank you, Rep. Ortiz. At this point, because our next conversation is leaning in on each of these subcommittees with one question of, is there a subcommittee any individual wants to help lean in on? And by that, it's not a big ask. It's be a thought partner to Carrie and me as we're putting content agendas together. It's be a thought partner as we identify experts, stakeholders, and conversations to have. Also, the other question will be, what would you most like this group to be exploring to bring back to you as this task force? And I'm going to go just in reverse order of the subcommittee, so let's stick on outdoors. And I will solicit now and in follow-up anybody who would like to lean in as kind of an executive sponsor from this group with that. And I'll ask you, are there other topics that you want to make sure this group explores? And Mr. Stone, I think I see you coming off mute if you'd like to jump in.
Thank you, Michael Stone. I have a couple questions. One is just how we could be familiar with when these groups are meeting. I'm not entirely certain that I've been privy to those meetings. So obviously I'd like to participate. That's question one. Question two is, let me get my thoughts here. Can we participate randomly? If it just out of interest, just as an observer, let's just say I have an interest in the outdoor side of things and or housing, but can't be in two places at the same time. But can I just pop into one of these meetings as an observer and go from there? And then lastly, obviously, as a Paralympic athlete, I would obviously like to be a part of the outdoors and access to outdoors subcommittee as much as possible.
Wonderful. Let me go through some of your remarks and questions in order. This is Barrett.
Thank you.
And I didn't realize you were a Paralympic athlete. I had the good fortune to be down at the Paralympic Museum a couple weeks ago in the Springs and was really moved by that. I'm going to address your question, then pull the LG in here. We just had these very first meetings. We had to kind of rush to get them scheduled in the month, and Carrie was dealing with doodle polls for 30 different people. We pulled them all together just last week. What we are going to be doing is getting the first quarter scheduled in the coming weeks for all of those meetings. We will share that schedule with all of you. We're also happy to include you when we send out notices of all of those meetings. I think we will need to talk about how best to engage members of the task force in the meetings themselves. We had initially set the kind of the boundary that those meetings were just the boards and commissions appointed members of those subcommittees, and that if anybody else from the public or this task force joined, it would be in the role of a member of the public. That said, if you're going to be kind of our strategic advisor on it, I think there's certainly ways that we would want to bring you in as an expert presenter on some of that. So I'll work with the chair and the vice chair to sort out how best to do that. But in any event, we will commit to all of you that starting in January, you will get advance notice of the full schedule of all of the subcommittees. And Lieutenant Governor.
Thanks, Barrick. And I appreciated Michael's interest because I think I want to say it's the recreation subcommittee. Seems like it's heavy leaning on physical disability. I'm not sure we have anybody who represents the deaf community or the blind community, unless I'm wrong, on that committee, or the IDD committee. IDD community. So it would be great, I think, at times to bring in some subject matter experts from some of the other disability groups.
I appreciate that. Other thoughts on either issues that you want to make sure this group either discusses to advance recommendations, things that you think they should be learning more about, experts they should hear from, or things you want to make sure they bring back to you, or interest in being kind of a strategic partner to carrying me for those. Again, we'll follow up. So it's nice, not the only opportunity. And if you escape my my list today, I will find you later and get you on one. But Rep Ortiz, I see your hand up, sir.
Yep, I really appreciate the fact that they focused on transportation. That's kind of an area on how to get to the outdoors. It's kind of an area that I overlooked, so really appreciate the subcommittee for calling that out. Something that might, going off of them, going above and beyond, that might be within their purview, because this was discussions around being a bill, is around accommodation and reservations at resorts and hotels, and what happens when they say they're accessible, but they're not, right? What happens when you say you rented out an accessible room, but the doorway to the bathroom is not wide enough to accommodate a wheelchair? Then who's responsible? Then what happens, right? And then if there's something proactively they can discuss around making sure that those standards are easily accessible for businesses, and that they're able to understand them very clearly and implement them within their own natural timeline of budgeting and construction, whatever that looks like. But I think that's something that should be discussed, because it was discussed as a possibility of bringing a bill forward this year. So I think that would be beneficial to the tourist industry to proactively discuss those issues.
Thank you. We'll bring that to the group. Other thoughts at this time for the Outdoor and Recreation Subcommittee? And again, at the risk of sounding like a broken record, this is far from your last opportunity to weigh in. And not only will I give you the opportunity, I will be insisting that you do as we reach back out after the holidays. I promise not to bother you over the next 10 days. Let's move to the housing subcommittee. And we had some initial response and input, which I greatly appreciate on this issue of time and money not being excuses. We talked about their interest in really understanding the scope of the issue, the fact that we need to look at both home ownership and rental. What questions would you like this group to explore that you didn't hear in the overview? What issues do you think it's critical that they are aware of or exploring? Who do you think they need to be hearing from? And ultimately, what is it you're hoping to hear back from the housing subcommittee when they report up to the task force throughout the year and in their final recommendations later next year? Rep Ortiz, and then I'll go to Kirsten.
Actually, I'm gonna let Kirsten have the floor first.
Oh, and sorry, I don't know how to use the,
That's
I'm
okay.
not good
We're
on
small
Zoom.
enough.
I can't figure out how to use the hand signal. Sorry about that. Anyway, so I would love to participate and be active in affordable housing. I've spent, a huge part of my career, even though my current role, and I still am in my current role, I'm the one who's assisting and currently negotiating on the Ball Arena rezoning, and the affordable housing plan that will be there. And so I definitely am interested in this issue for a lot of reasons. And I think what we need to be really thoughtful about, again, is and we need to probably really lean into, and it's great that we have the Lieutenant Governor on here as well, because hopefully we can elevate this issue. I think we need to really tie this to an issue that also addresses affordable housing that has subsidies available with it, because the way to do these things right is to make sure that there's enough. I mean, I totally understand Representative Ortiz. We're going to have a lot of conversations. I totally get how everyone always throws that up as a easy excuse, but there's a part that's just a reality of it, right? So if we're going to be tasked with moving forward and making sure that we're going to be requiring new standards and making sure that it's addressed and incorporated into design, which is extremely important. That's the place where it needs to get done. It needs to get done at the design level. If we're going to do that, we need to make sure that there's also the ability to implement that, right? That's also our job as a task force, right? We could set all the standards and requirements we want to. If we can't help people actually implement it, it's not going to go well, right? Like, I think the way to do this is to marry the two. That's my thought.
Thank you, Kirsten. I'm going to go to Rep Ortiz, and then I think I saw the Lieutenant Governor's hand go up and maybe back down. Lieutenant Governor, if you wanted to jump in, I'll call on you after the representative.
Yeah, this is Rep Ortiz. I 100% agree, like that, and that is the explicit purpose of this task force. My concern at the beginning was hearing the same excuses that come up without necessarily the idea of solutions. Like, it is specifically incumbent on this subcommittee to talk about best practices to implement these new standards. And let's be very clear, like, they shouldn't be new. Again, we need to make sure that we frame these conversations in a way that able-bodied people are very familiar with and understand, like talking about the fact that, yes, affordable homes are more expensive in 2023 than they were in 1910 because we have better safety standards. And it took disasters and losses of life in order to realize that, right? There was a process that they then went through to talk about what should the new standards be and how should they be implemented, paid for, and enforced, right? So no one is saying don't cite cost at all. What I am saying is don't cite cost and then sit back and throw your hands up. And I'm hoping that the subcommittee understands that that's not going to be acceptable, that we need to talk about cost and standards. But then the discussion needs to be, what is the most efficient and effective way to implement and educate around those standards so we're not building in extra unnecessary time waiting for permits or waiting for A, B, or C. So what can we do to streamline the process? That is solution-based thinking. Yes, it's going to cost more in certain areas, but how do we make it the most cost-effective? Well, we do it in the design phase, which I completely agree with. But if someone overlooks that, on them, because it was easier for them to overlook that, what teeth are we going to put in place to say, well, you kind of shirked it, that's kind of your fault, so what are the remedies going to be now, right? So this is the purpose of this subcommittee. I really hope and I expect that they take that seriously. I know they will. This is something I would like to be involved in. And I think an approach that might be helpful too is the same with the codifix, is let's talk about the lowest hanging fruit that people can unanimously agree on and that they can build that relationship on and that team on, and then start tackling more of the difficult questions.
I appreciate that. We will take you up on that offer. And what I want to assure you and this entire task force, while I can't tell you at all what solutions they will offer, we do not facilitate groups to sit around the table admiring a problem, naming the problem, and describing the problem. Our commitment to all of you is that we will facilitate them bringing solutions to you, as well as the considerations around implementing them. But we are absolutely committed to bringing you actionable solutions from each of these. Other input on the housing subcommittee before we move on to the next one. Lieutenant Governor.
I just had some random thoughts. I really appreciate this work because, I'm learning a lot, and I thought I knew a lot since I've been working in this area since I was 16. And I could be wrong, and probably Rep Ortiz or Rep Armagost could correct me, but it seems to me like the disability community is the only minority group or marginalized group where we have laws that actually keep people in poverty. We had subminimum wage for a long time. We have laws that require people exhaust all their resources, before they get help. And I never understood intergenerational wealth until I started working with the tribes also, but I never associated that with this particular group, that they don't have the ability to, pass on, intergenerational wealth. So it's been really, great for me to connect the dots. So, I think it's time that we get rid of some of these laws that keep people in poverty and try and figure out ways, about help with down payments and different things like that give people a hand up so that they can, acquire intergenerational wealth and get themselves out of poverty.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. Elizabeth, I saw you come back on screen. Did you want to jump in or?
No, I actually was
Okay.
looking for a reaction to applaud. Yes,
Very well.
I couldn't agree more.
Wonderful. And I just want to make clear for anybody watching the YouTube stream of this, in every meeting we do withhold time for public comment. If anybody is online or jumps online and would like to provide public comment during the last 10 minutes, please do drop. This is the one time I will say to use the chat and drop a message directly to me, Barrick Abramson. We will invite you in. With that, I'm going to shift us to the government subcommittee. And again, invite folks to weigh in on specific issues that you want to make sure are on the radar of this group, that they need to be considering, your aspirations or hopes for what they address and bring back to you, or any questions about what we talked about earlier. Representative Ortiz, please.
This Rep Ortiz, I think something that needs to be put on their radar now, specifically because this is timely, because there is a ballot initiative that's coming forward to try and eliminate caucusing and put interest in the wealthiest individuals. I think this is something that needs to be addressed. The fact that caucusing is the only accessible means to get on the ballot at this time, and the fact that there's not just outside interest trying to put forward a ballot initiative, but there's a movement within each individual party to eliminate caucusing, citing that it's not truly representative government or accessible. And this is coming, these criticisms are coming from a place of a very myopic view, and that's their view, their able-bodied view, their ableist viewpoint. So I really think that needs to be put on their radar now, since this ballot initiative will be coming forward.
Rep Ortiz, if it's okay, I'd love to follow up with you on how we can present information about that to them and kind of spark that conversation.
I appreciate that. We'll do.
Other thoughts on the government subcommittee, where we're talking about everything from, as we've just talked, access to the ballot, to running for and serving in office, to being employed, to the issue of accessibility to every government program, service, and employment with the government. Are there additional thoughts or issues anybody would like to make sure are covered? Again, we're leaving this door very open going forward.
Last thing I'll bring up, this is Rep Ortiz, is the contracting for the programming and the tools that government utilizes. I want to call back to the fact that a lot of our visually impaired brothers and sisters that work for the state, if their supervisors are unable to use the system that manages PTO, that manages people's time off, sick days, etc., because that program is not accessible for people with disabilities. So that needs to be looked at as a specific topic that they explore as well, is how are we encouraging these private companies that are creating suites of software for our government agencies to use, how are we incentivizing and ensuring that they make those programs accessible for people with disabilities as well?
Thank you. Other thoughts? Okay, and then finally, for today's discussion, again, I'm going to follow up with all of you on all of these groups, the rewrite subcommittee. And this one has made a little more progress. I've shared the definitions they intend to recommend to you, the topics they intend to explore. Are there members who have questions, suggestions, suggested resources, or who want to lean in on this subcommittee? Jennifer, please.
Hi, this is Jennifer Harpole. For those who don't have my background, I'm an employment litigator, and so I would be happy to lean in on this one. I've been involved with, proposing and working on legislative language in other areas as well. So happy to jump in on this one.
Great, thank you. Any other thoughts or questions about this subcommittee? I don't see any. At this point, we would be turning to public comment. I have not received any requests virtually or by message of members of the public wishing to make comments, which may mean that I get everybody out of here a little early. But before I do, I want to open it to general conversation and remarks from the full group. I will tell you that we will be scheduling all of the meetings for this task force. We're working in. I know legislative session creates some unknowns, both for our electeds and for others involved in that process. Carrie is working with our chair and vice chair's offices so we can get the meetings of this exec council scheduled out through the first quarter so we get them on your calendars ahead of time. We are also going to be, between now and the end of the year, scheduling all of the subcommittees. So again, we can report out to you or circulate to you that schedule of meetings. But in the few minutes that we have left, I'll invite anybody who would like to just reflect on the work, the conversations we've had, or offer remarks for the good of the group.
Ms. Rep. Ortiz, I just want to thank you and Carrie for your hard work. I mean, this is having you both on the team and kind of being the common thread, not just between the subcommittees, but between them and us, has been very helpful. So I want to thank the Govs team for having brought you on and appreciate you for all your time and effort. I want to thank everybody that's on this team for their open and honest discussion. This is what's going to make the difference. Again, so if I offer pushback, it's not personal. And I hope everybody understands that too. This is obviously an area that I'm passionate about and that I'm invested in, but good ideas can come from anywhere. And I'm looking forward to moving past just the same discussions around cost and time and looking at the myriad of solutions that are going to be brought forward and working together to make the tough decisions on solutions to recommend. So I really appreciate everyone's time and talent and their effort in this. This is really critical work. As I said, we didn't get our civil rights until 1990. It's long overdue. And I want Colorado to be the example to the rest of this nation on how to make sure we're creating equity for people living with disabilities.
Thank you, Rep. Ortiz. And I will be curious if anybody wants to try to follow that.
Well, I can't believe I am, but I
This is
think one
Kirsten.
thing, this is Kirsten. One thing I think that is really important and that I think we need to be really mindful of and really thoughtful about, again, Representative Ortiz is focusing on those solutions, right? I think that's really the key because part of what it is that I think and why I wanted to be a part of this task force when asked was to help actually change the conversation. And I think we have to be mindful about how it is we're going to change the conversation in a manner that works, right? A manner that works with solutions already laid out. And I think part of that is also, and I say this out loud because I think we have to be really thoughtful about wanting to also ask and be really clear about the fact that we're going to have funding requests that are going to have to come as part of this. And that's going to be a part that we're going to have to be really mindful about and really thoughtful about. And that's something I would lean on. This is not my area of expertise about how it is you put those things together and everything else that goes along with it. But I think that it would be foolhardy for us to put all of this time and effort and energy and passion into how it is to change the conversation and not have the ability to back it up with the actions that we're recommending for those to actually be implemented. And I would take it a step further and say we should be really thoughtful about probably engaging some other entities in that conversation a little bit earlier, like getting involved with maybe, the Department of Housing and things like that right now, and maybe even starting that conversation a little bit earlier also with the folks, with the outdoor folks, right? It can't be that, and I don't know enough about, my apologies, I'm a little ignorant on this and knowing the exact department names, but we can't be thinking like from a government outdoor perspective that we're going to be implementing all sorts of new expectations and kind of, objectives and actions and things that we want to take without having to have already had them in the conversation from the beginning. So I think that's the other thing I would say is that we should probably be really mindful as a task force about engaging these other departments that we're inherently going to trigger very quickly, because I think by engaging with them, that might be also an opportunity to lay out really specific funding requests, because the way that this is going to be the most beneficial is if those actions have money behind them and can start moving. So that's my thought. So thank you, everyone. I really appreciate your guys' time today.
Thank you, Kirsten. And in a second, I'm going to bring staff in. I do want to check in with Rep. Armagost. I don't know if you're in a place where you're able to come off mute or on camera, but I want to make sure you've got the opportunity to offer any thoughts if you'd like to.
Yes, sir. I'm just happy to see that these conversations are happening. And again, but the ability to not only address the obstacles that we have, but offering the solutions. There's a lot of innovation in the group, obviously, from all of these conversations that we're having. And it's good to see that we're moving forward with solution-based thinking, and I'd like to see that continue. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Rob. And at this point, I'm going to do something I will only do today because it's coming up on the holidays. We've had some really good conversations. We have a number of staff from across state government that are supporting this work. They're on these calls. They keep their cameras off. They have been such amazing thought partners and Sherpas to both Carrie and me. So I want to shout out if they'd like to come on camera. I'll invite it, but I won't put them on the spot. Aubrey in the Civil Rights Division, Josh Winkler and Mark Honan in the LG's office, Katie, who keeps us all organized on the comm side, Katie O'Donnell from DORA. Thank you all. And Josh, I think you may have had a thought on something that Kirsten was saying. I also just want to give each member of staff an opportunity to say anything if they'd like to, but again, I'm not going to grill you. And I'm getting waved off by at least one. But Josh, I'll go to you first and then to Mark.
Yeah, thanks, Barrick. I'm Josh Winkler, Senior Disability Policy Advisor in the Lieutenant Governor's Office. And I was just gonna, to Kirsten's comments, just say yes, absolutely on all of that. We've actually been working on a list of all the agency subject matter experts that may need to be tapped in for all the conversations or some of the conversations in specific areas to really weigh in on beyond housing, for example. There's various experts at DOLA who have the Department of Local Affairs who have pieces of the knowledge and things that a lot of people just don't even know exist currently. That would be a good starting point of like, hey, there's this program that exists. Maybe it's underutilized. Maybe we could make recommendations on how to change that up a little bit. So yeah, definitely. I'm going to work with Barrick and Carrie to get the right people at the right meetings going forward now that the kind of introductory meetings of the subcommittees happened. And then, kind of on the bigger picture of like, how do we fund things and how do we, implement this in the long run? Just to circle back to the Lieutenant Governor's opening comments, that's really the idea of this Office of or the Colorado Disability Opportunity Office that we're working on with Rep. Ortiz is, and the reality is out of groups like this, a lot of recommendations come. Colorado has a single subject rule and a tight budget. And so there's not likelihood that there's going to be a single bill in 2025 based on the recommendations out of the task force that addresses everything that comes out of this. Like, it'll probably be a number of years that things get added into some other housing bill, some other outdoor bill, some other budget package. And so that office, among many other things, will be able to continue to make sure that the things that get identified in that report get brought up as those conversations go on, as Rep. Ortiz is no longer in office, Rep. Armagost is no longer in office, the Polis Primavera administration is no longer in office. The reality is, like, the faces at the legislature and the governor's office change, and we do have to make sure that these issues remain, on people's radars. So that's really the goal, because we know that we're not going to solve it all at one shot.
Thank you, Josh. And you're getting a sense of why for every one call that we get to have with all of you, we have a half a dozen calls with state staff to make sure that we're making the best use of your time and the subcommittee's time. Mark, did you want to say hello to everybody?
Yeah, thanks, Barrick. So this is Mark Honan, Chief of Staff for Lieutenant Governor Primavera, and would just start off by saying thank you, Barrick and Carrie, for all the work that I know has gone into this and the amount of energy that y'all have invested. I know, like Josh, I've had the opportunity, like the Lieutenant Governor spoke to attend all the subcommittee meetings thus far, and just really want to emphasize just how much I appreciate the thoughtful and engaging conversations that the subcommittee members have had thus far. Of course, Barrick and Carrie, your facilitation of those conversations, especially at the initial stages. So just really want to appreciate that. And then also, most importantly, just also want to really appreciate and thank the members of the task force for their leadership, and then just the amazing and just thoughtful, both professional expertise that I think everyone on this task force has been bringing to the conversations, but then also the lived experience that individuals are bringing to the conversation. That I know Lieutenant Governor consistently speaks to. We can spend a lot of time talking about policy, about legislation, but always reminding ourselves that there are individuals we're talking about when we're talking about policy and legislation. So to really bring that lived experience, I just so appreciate, again, the leadership and the thoughtful comments from all the members of the task force. So again, so appreciate everyone's time and energy, and looking forward to another 13 months of spending time with one another. So again, just really appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Mark. And I have to shout out Aubrey, whether she's going to say hello or not. Here's somebody that has the caseload that would require 3 times the headcount she has over there, in addition to making time to support Carrie and me. While I understand dealing with the fun some people can relate to of a state audit going on, which just has that rotating fun. But Aubrey, you want to say hello to everybody?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So first, thank you again to Barrick and Carrie. I think it takes a huge, huge amount of skill to take the kinds of concerns and issues that we're discussing and really take them to heart and listen and be able to create a cohesive conversation from those things. And then also, just to keep it brief, I'll echo Representative Ortiz in what he said. This is an area that I am also extremely, extremely passionate about. So I am honored to be a part of this and be involved in it. And I'm so excited to hear these conversations that are taking place. So thanks.
Thank you, Aubrey. And with that, with 3 minutes to go, we will wrap up. If you have recently or will be celebrating holidays, I hope they are a time filled with peace and some time with the people that make life so special, that everybody gets at least a day or 2 off from having your phone constantly blowing up, that your inbox is turned off for at least 24 hours, if not 72. With that, have a fantastic next few weeks and a great new year. We'll connect with everybody about the schedule for meetings during the first quarter. Thank you for the opportunity to support all of you, and we will see you in 2024. Thanks all.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays, everyone.